From fabulous Las Vegas, PartyPoker.net presents Powerful Poker Profits, starring Vegas Vic himself, Victor H. Royer. And now, here's Vegas Vic.
Hello and welcome to our show. In this episode, we are going to discuss strategies for Limit Texas Hold'em. Any game which is identified as limit is different from pot limit or no limit games, specifically because each betting round is limited to a set amount. In this program, we assume that you already know how to play Texas Hold'em and are therefore familiar with the betting procedures. If you need a little help with the basics, I recommend you look at our program titled Introduction to Texas Hold'em. And now, let's go to the table. As you gain more experience in Texas Hold'em, you will be able to appreciate the many subtleties and variations in this game. Some are easy to identify, such as the difference between limit Hold'em, pot limit Hold'em, and no limit Hold'em. In this program, we are discussing Limit Texas Hold'em, and therefore the remainder of this show will focus on the strategies that can be applied to this game. The best way to approach Limit Texas Hold'em is to first become aware of the differences within this game as you progress from low limits through middle limits and up to the higher limits. Playing strategies are different for each of these limits and also for each game within these limits. Whenever you play low limit Texas Hold'em, there are three major circumstances that you will face. First, you will notice that there will always be many players calling bets and raises prior to the flop and even continuing with marginal or long shot hands all the way to the river, seemingly oblivious to any concept of pot odds or the odds against them. The truth is that most of these players will not understand or often not even be aware that any such considerations actually exist and are supposed to apply to their decision making. Second, you will quickly notice that most players at these limits will not respect the value of a raise and consequently will hardly ever fold a hand that appears to them to have at least some kind of potential. The effect of this will be that premium playing hands such as pocket aces and pocket kings or any other of the highly prized premium starting hands will lose much of their value as a result. This will also have the direct effect of causing players of these hands to suffer many more bad beats. Third, you will also quickly notice that most pots are won at the showdown and will often be contested by several players. From a strategic perspective, it is of crucial importance for you to remember these three situations and be aware of the circumstances to which they apply. In any such low-limit game, the vast majority of players who play them will fall into two distinct categories. Category A type players are new and novice players, those just learning the game. Category B type players are recreational and tourist players who are basically there to enjoy themselves and to gamble. Consequently, playing in these low-limit games means you have to play a wider range of hands and adapt more quickly to the specific circumstances of that particular game in progress. Another strategic concept often misunderstood by players of low-limit games is the straightforward approach to betting. Consequently, your best approach to such games is to simply bet your hand and bet it for all the value you can get out of it. Don't try to be deceptive and don't try to make poker moves on your opponents, such as you may have perhaps seen professional players make on TV. Most of the opponents that you will encounter in these low-limit games won't understand this and won't even be aware that you are making such plays. As you move up to the middle limits, you will notice that about half the players will now be more knowledgeable and as a result a little tougher to play against. However, you will also notice that about half of these players will still play in about the same way as those at the small and low limits. Therefore, the first strategic decision you need to make is to identify the types of players that happen to be in this particular game. The ideal mix is about half and half. You want your opponents to be a mixture of loose and passive, such as most tourist and recreational players are, and those who are tight and passive, such as most of those who have recently moved up in limits and are trying to play by the book. You will also often find a mixture of loose and aggressive recreational players. Against these types of players, you can modify your strategic approach by simply letting them bet your strong hands for you and raise and check raise them whenever the limits double on the turn and sometimes even on the river. The games in which you do not want to play are those that consist primarily of tight aggressive players. It is players like these who will often correctly exploit late position situations and otherwise play a much more disciplined game. This is not the game that will be profitable for you. Therefore, game selection becomes much more important in the middle limits and also as you progress to the higher limits. A good mix of the right type of player will permit you to be able to play your game the way you want to play it, as opposed to having to react to the game dimensions imposed by others. Finally, if your bankroll can stand the heat, you can join the big game. There are two ways in which you can play at limits as high as these. One, you happen to be very wealthy, or two, you have earned your way through the ranks and have now acquired a poker bankroll sufficient to play at these limits. That poker playing bankroll should be at least 100 times the size of the big blind. For example, if you are playing in a $200 and $400 game, your minimum required bankroll is 100 times the big blind, which in this case is 100 times 400, which equals $40,000. In these games, you can now play a variety of hands in a variety of ways. First, you can more successfully exploit your positional advantages, such as playing on the button, in the cutoff seat, and in late positions. Second, you can manipulate your opponents more easily. This can be achieved by raising and check raising, by slow playing, and by bluffing. In fact, one of the strongest strategic plays that you can use is what is called the isolation play. This is a method of either raising or re-raising one or more of your opponents in order to isolate those that are yet to act behind you, and as a result, preferably, get heads up with just one or at most two opponents. Exactly which hands to play and how to play them in any of these limited games will significantly depend on the nature of each game. In the low limits, you can press your advantage with higher suited cards and middle suited connectors. In the middle limits, you will need to play a bit tighter, more selective, and with positional advantage and selective aggression. In the higher limits, you will need to play your opponents more than your cards, while at the same time applying positional advantage as well as tight aggressive discipline. Exactly how well you can do this depends on your ability to be able to acquire not just the knowledge of how to play Texas Hold'em, but also the skills in applying that knowledge successfully and profitably. This is not easy to do. For many players, playing the game for fun and profit are often mutually exclusive. Such players will eventually give up when the going gets too hard and decide it is better to have some fun rather than to play and continue to playing well. There's nothing wrong with that approach to the game. If all you want to do is to have fun playing, then you can play at whatever limits your bankroll allows. If, on the other hand, you want to play for consistent profits, you will have to sacrifice some of the fun and instead substitute discipline. Playing Limit Texas Hold'em is a great way for you to gain experience from the very smallest of limits all the way up to the big game. And once you have gained such experience, that will make it so much easier for you to whet your appetite in the no-limit arena. For now, and until next time, remember to play smart and play to win. I'm Victor H. Royer, and this has been a presentation of PartyPoker.net. Bye!
This has been a presentation of MRM Entertainment, Inc. in association with Nevada Production Studios and PartyPoker.net.